Welcome to the Passive House podcast, brought to you by Passive House Accelerator, a catalyst for zero carbon building. For news, stories, and connections from all flavours of Passive House, check out the articles, videos, and more at passivehouseaccelerator.com. Sign up to receive regular updates about events, join the community forum, and of course, attend the weekly online Global Passive House Happy Hour. Now, here's this week's Passive House podcast. Well, welcome back to another episode of the Passive House podcast. I'm Matthew Cutler-Welsh, coming to you from Auckland in New Zealand.
And I'm Zach Semke, coming to you from Seattle, Washington.
You got snow on the ground there, Zach?
Not quite, but it might actually happen. They're talking about it tomorrow and the next day, which is not a very common occurrence in Seattle. It's always super fun.
No.
So,
but it does sound like things are a bit chilly over on the East Coast over there. It's certainly enough for me to be hearing about it here on the other side of the planet.
Yeah, definitely. There's a big, I think, polar vortex that's creeped down into North America.
It's a good time to be talking about staying warm and dry inside when it's cold outside.
Yeah, it's perfect passive house weather.
Absolutely. Perfect. Yes. It's been some great activities on recently. I really enjoyed the Tech Tuesday yesterday. I just really like hearing stories about stuff that totally makes sense, like prefabricated construction, and also using smart technology. And when that comes together with Passive House is really, really awesome. So yeah, some great stuff there. I'm sure people already checked into that. If they haven't already, they should definitely check it out and get involved and join into those sessions whenever possible.
Yeah, absolutely. Last night was great with Brandon talking about his work in San Diego, doing prefab and modular passive house. And actually, on that score, we are about to release our first Passive House Accelerator magazine. So this is a direct outgrowth from Passive House Buildings magazine. Mary James's a publication that she's been doing for years. Now she is on board with the Accelerator and producing magazines with us. And the first issue is about prefab passive house. So
will this be a e-magazine, or will it be a hard copy physical thing?
It is available in both forms. It's an e-magazine that you can download as a PDF from the website. In fact, by the time this is published, this will likely be available already on the Passive House Accelerator website. And then there's also an option to purchase a physical copy, and it's basically printed to order by a third-party service. So that's how we're handling that. Yeah.
All right. Well, let's get into this week's interview. We've got a bit of a long one, and that's partly my fault, because I was enjoying the conversation so much, because this guest is just truly inspirational. I wasn't even aware. I mean, I obviously seen her online through the Global Happy Hour. She is a great contributor to that and a familiar face with a lot of our listeners. But I just wasn't aware of how much she has done and the interesting journey she's taken to get where she is today. So how about you give us a quick intro, Zach?
I will. And I'm glad that you didn't cut it short. It is worth the time that people are about to take, I think, to listen. It's fantastic. So Prudence Ferreira is the senior associate at the carbon dioxide neutral group at BR+A Consulting Engineers. That's her current role. She also is co-host of the Global Passive House Happy Hour. I've been talking with her and strategizing with her about building a passive house construction detail library on the accelerator as well. She's an advisor with the accelerator. I first met her in 2011 in the mountains around Innsbruck, Austria, at the Passive House
Awesome.
International Passive House Conference, and have been inspired and impressed by Prudence's work since then. She's been a technical leader, a leading practitioner throughout North America and beyond, and is just one of the great minds of our community. And a great leader. So the conversation with you was just mined new kind of regions that I hadn't heard about before, and I think everyone's really going to enjoy it.
All right, well, let's get into it. I started out with asking Prudence how she got into building and architecture in the first place. Well, I want to start out talking about you, because you're the star of the show today, but also you are a star in Passive House world as well, and great part of the happy hour and other parts of the Passive House Accelerator. But let's go back and talk about how you got into this world. How did you get into the construction industry in the first place?
So I got in through permaculture. Mm-hmm. And before permaculture, I got in through dance. And that might not make a lot of sense.
Yeah.
But I started dancing when I was 6 years old. And so I grew up with kind of a special relationship to my body and nature, where my body was my temple. I ate organic. I was vegetarian. I really cared about what I was putting into my body. And so that opened up a whole sort of frontier of different ways to think about the world. I didn't want to go to normal doctors. I wanted to do alternative therapies and all of that sort of stuff. So when I went off to school to get a fine arts degree in dance, I continued learning about natural healing therapies and that sort of thing. And then when I transitioned from my dancing career, because I got injured and it was done, I was working in the kind of the alternative health world. I was working in an acupuncture clinic, and I was managing the supplement departments for Whole Foods, where they sell all of the herbs and vitamins and stuff. And so I got hired away from Whole Foods to go do sales for a distributor first and then a manufacturer. And that was my first foray into sustainability. I had started learning permaculture during the time I was working at Whole Foods, and had gone through a permaculture designer's course, and was trying to figure out how to apply it to my work. And so when I got hired by first a distributor and then an organic food manufacturer, it's like, I'm going to look at their practices. I'm going to look at their corporate practices and see how I can apply these permacultural principles. And so very quickly, I started being engaged in lighting retrofit projects or wastewater projects or building upgrade projects. And what I didn't know, I just learned along the way. And
because you were being brought in as to do the permaculture side of things, but there were these other things happening around.
I was already there doing sales, but I had learned about permaculture. And because I tend to be a person that gets excited and that excitement is infectious, I'm waving my hands around saying, hey guys, we could be doing all this cool stuff that we're not doing. We're an organic food distributor, or we're an organic food manufacturer. What about X, Y, and Z? And they're like, oh, sure. Yeah. Look into that. Like, what can we do? How much does it cost?
Yeah.
So I just started, I was doing sales, but they would kind of let me do these little side projects. And then very gradually I was doing half-time sales and half-time running the sustainability program that was new for them. And
Right.
as I got more into that, I realized that although I love people, working with people is hard. Organizational change is really hard. When it comes to people's psychology, right? The numbers are so much easier. If you can work on projects where you can see a quantifiable impact through numbers, like that's super easy. So that's what I started gravitating towards, because that really gave me a feeling of satisfaction. Like, wow, okay, I'm making a difference. What I'm doing is making a difference. And so through all of that, I had learned about LEED and Energy Star and all of that sort of stuff, and I'd gotten my LEED AP, but I found Passive House somehow pretty quickly after I had started doing sustainability consulting in the corporate world. And once I found Passive House, that was kind of it for me. It was like,
did you work as a lead consultant for a while? Did you do some lead projects?
I did lead consulting and lead energy modeling. And
Oh, so you started to get into the modeling side of things as well.
I did. So when I decided that I didn't want to do corporate sustainability consulting anymore, I started. I had been an independent consultant for a while, but I just started focusing more on the building side, because that was what really got me going. And lead consulting
and the numbers.
Yeah, lead consulting was an easy way to get your foot in the door, right? There was a lot of lead consulting going on at that point in time. I gravitated towards the energy modeling, and then Passive House came along.
Was that being driven? Were there subsidies or people being pushed in that direction, or was it just the market?
Yeah, there was preferential permitting at that point in time. I was living in the Bay Area and San Francisco Bay Area. And so, projects that were doing LEED Gold were getting some preferential permitting at that point. And there was a lot of popularity of LEED, even if it wasn't actually getting any incentives or preferential permitting. But I believe there were, at least on the commercial side, you do 30% better than Title 24, and there were some incentives there. So that was definitely driving some of the interest in LEED at that point in time.
Thinking about permaculture, my very limited understanding of permaculture is that it is holistic and looks at the whole at a system and sort of inputs outputs. I can see the attraction to something like LEED, which is also holistic and has a lot of different moving parts, and you need to understand everything from waste through to material selection and certainly energy, but also light, acoustics, all those aspects. What was it that drove you to focus more and more just on the energy, health, and comfort side, which is really what all the Passive House is a fairly limited scope in the
it is.
When you compare it to something like LEED. What was it that attracted you to Passive House?
I think the personality type I have is one where I like to go deep on something. I feel
those numbers again. You wanted the spreadsheets, right?
Yeah, I feel like I wasn't really seeing the impact I knew was possible using a system like LEED. You're right that it is more holistic in terms of looking at various inflows and outputs, but I just didn't feel like I had enough expertise in any one of those areas to really be able to make a difference.
Right.
And because I was so drawn to the numbers sides of things, really for me, it was the decision was, do I want to specialize in wastewater or do I want to specialize in building energy? And it was more like biology, chemistry versus math and physics. And there was just more opportunity and more interest and energy for me going in the direction of buildings. And so that's the place where I decided to dig in. But even now, on some of the projects that I'm consulting on, where clients are asking me to do overall sustainability consulting in addition to the Passive House piece, I bring in that permaculture thing anytime I can. So it's like, okay, well, let's do agriculture on the roof. Let's let people have
Yep.
permaculture plots. Let's start a site-wide composting program. So
Uh-huh.
it's possible to bring it sort of full circle now because of the kinds and scales of
Yeah.
projects that I'm getting to work on due to the Passive House expertise.
But I feel like the more I learn about Passive House, it makes sense to go that way, because if you get the Passive House bit right, then you can add on those other things, and it just makes a really great sustainable building. But if you start with the composting and the roof garden, and that's the focus, you might miss a few things that are really fundamental to the actual performance of the building in terms of its energy use and its thermal comfort.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I've stayed in touch with a lot of my permaculture friends who have stayed more in that agriculture area, or they went off into wastewater or mycology or something like that. And it takes a community, right? Like, we need to
Yeah.
have specialists in each one of those areas that can work together and understand how it's all interwoven. And one very good example, just to make it specific to a project example, is once we decarbonize the building as much as we can, and we don't need as much
Mm-hmm.
energy to have it be comfortable, great indoor air quality, carbon neutral, then we need to, and we get to decide, okay, how do we want to use the landscaping and the roof space? Is the best use really an
Yeah.
expanse of photovoltaics? Is that going to build community and social equity and social interaction? Or have we gotten the building source energy demands low enough that now we can do a smaller PV array? We can invest in a solar or a wind farm or some kind of community energy that's nearby, and
Mm-hmm.
then have those spaces
Yeah.
be more agricultural. But to the extent that we don't dial in our building physics, then, it's like we do need more generation. We don't have as much opportunity to really consider holistically what we're going to do with those spaces, because maybe owners are feeling like, well, we're still using so much energy that we really need to have photovoltaics on all of our surfaces, or something along those lines.
Yeah. 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 When people ask now that don't know what you do, what do you say? How do you describe what it is that you do?
Well, right now, what I'm doing is even a little bit different from what I've been talking about so far. Um, I just started with a new firm, and they focus on industrial engineering and mechanical, electrical, plumbing for labs, hospitals, that sort of thing. And
Yeah.
um, I, over the last decade or so, I've learned a lot about what not to do on really fast-paced,
Right.
large-scale passive house projects where you have overlapping design and construction phases. And so I've developed some really good tools. I have a system that I call the Passive House Critical Path that allows design teams to get through all the Passive House sticky spots in a really streamlined fashion and quickly. But
Mm-hmm.
I'm right now, I'm even going a step further than that and actually focusing on where I see the next big opportunity in our industry, which is leveraging. I'm gonna explain this, and then I'm gonna explain it again, because I think the words that I'm gonna use are gonna be a little bit foreign at first listen.
Uh-huh.
What I'm really excited about and focused on right now is leveraging the simplicity of object-oriented programming with easy coding languages like Python to create powerful, streamlined workflows for passive house and carbon neutral buildings that use what's called non-dominated sorting genetic algorithm 2, or NSGA2, to do multi-objective evolutionary optimization. And What
Wow.
what this means in normal
Yeah, that was a
designer
whole bunch of
speak,
words right there.
right? What this means in normal
Yeah.
designer speak is that big data can do the heavy lifting for us. As designers, we know
Huh.
enough. We know enough about the basic physics of what we need to do envelope wise, what we need to do mechanical wise. We've got the best practices, but our brains, our human biological brains, cannot process all of the combinations of parameters that are possible to get to a passive house carbon neutral building for any given typology. Our brains just can't do it, but we can tell computers what we want our solution space to be. We can say, we want to minimize cost. We want to minimize carbon. We want to maximize comfort. We want to maximize indoor air quality. We want to minimize R values as much as possible with these other objectives we have. We want to
Mm-hmm.
maximize U values. So we can essentially define all of these multiple objectives that, for our biological brains, we may think, okay, these things are competing with each other in some ways.
Yeah.
In some ways they're
Yeah.
aligned, in some ways they're competing. But to the extent that we can allow these evolutionary algorithms to solve for multiple objectives for us, we save a whole lot of time and risk in the early design process. And that means for developers, who are one of the main groups that we need to change their minds and get them to understand how doing passive house carbon neutral buildings is not risky, and it's actually going to save them money in the long run. To the extent that we leverage big data to show them that in super early design, before we've even started developing details or anything, and we do some early cost estimating and show, actually, this really is the way to go, then the whole industry is going to
Yeah.
revolutionize much, much faster. And the cool thing about it is the tools that we have now, and that the kids are learning in architecture school, like
Yeah.
Rhino, which opens
Yeah.
up into this whole world of grasshopper and honeybee, which are open source bugs. They're little open source programs that people write and share. This is what the kids like and know how to do. This is the environment that they're used to working in. And to the extent that our industry can meet our youth, our next generation, where they're at with the tools they're already using, and then use our experience with understanding, what the levers are in terms of what needs to be optimized, and then use big data, it's a match made in heaven, right? So we can revolutionize the
Yeah.
design process, and we can essentially use these evolutionary algorithms to teach neural networks how to respond really quickly for different typologies. And so if we take all of the outputs, all of the optimized outputs from an evolutionary algorithm, and we allow those outputs to teach an artificial intelligence or to teach a neural network, the more data we throw at it that's
Mm-hmm.
already optimized to teach it, the smaller the solution space gets, the faster we get to an answer.
Mm.
And so what will happen over time as we start teaching these neural networks with the experience we already have is we'll be able to sit in a meeting with a developer and an architect and just have some really basic conceptual stuff that we can sketch up right there in the meeting. And by the time we leave the meeting, we can actually already have something to price, right? That's kind of where things are heading.
Wow. Yeah. Because the alternative, I get the way we're doing things now, for those that haven't jumped into the weeds, if we just take PHI, for example, and PHPP,
Mm-hmm.
it's a big old spreadsheet, isn't it?
Right. Yep.
It's very, in some ways, it's quite archaic. It's just for most people, it's Excel. It's literally just a spreadsheet, and the type of analysis I think you're describing at the moment is going a lot of it's going over my head. But I've seen people do a base model and then lots of different scenarios. So they'll try
Mm-hmm.
what happens if we change it to this type of wall, and then we put in these type of windows. But that's what takes a long time, is it, in the design process right now, to try all those different things, because you've got to kind of keep everything else the same and then switch out. Let's try these windows, and then let's
Right.
try the same windows but slightly smaller. And is what you're saying, if we're a bit smarter with the software, we can get the computer to do that trial and error and just pop out
That's
the result when we've
that's
gone and had a cup of
exactly.
coffee.
Yes, that's exactly right. So what you're describing there is parametric analysis. And yeah, I mean, folks like Graham Irwin have been, working on stuff like that, and Bronwyn Berry and Thornton Tomasetti has a tool called Design Explorer, and Morrison Hirschfield has a tool. There are a lot of people that have parametric analysis tools that are out there that have somewhat automated the process, but then there are
Right.
shops where they're doing that parametric analysis one case at a time, changing one parameter at a time manually.
Yeah.
So there's a
Yeah.
whole range of designers that are working in that space of like, okay, we know if we change the parameters, we can find the sweet spot, we can find the good combination. And you're exactly right. By automating all of that, and then by teaching computers based on the results of those automations, we can come to our answers a lot faster. Yeah. And it
Yeah.
doesn't mean we
Right.
have to stop using
That's
Excel. We can still use Excel, but we don't need to take as long, and we can get the computers to help us do the heavy lifting by teaching them what we want and
they
teaching
can
them
do all
the
the boring
results.
bits.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So then we can start
So we get to be a
focusing.
bit more creative.
Yeah, we can start focusing on creativity, and to the extent that we do start going in this direction, and there are a lot of firms that are starting to use AI. In fact, there's a conference that I just got invited to that's all about architects within the AIA that are using data science and AI to help inform their designs. It's a small subset, but we're trying to, at least in my team, we're trying to come up with a way where this can be open source, shared with people, whether they're young designers or it's a one person shop where now they have the powerful analysis that ordinarily would be like a large engineering firm doing this, and it's an equalizing force. It's really equalizing, so that in
Yeah.
terms of social equality just within the design world, that means that our designs are not going to cost as much. We can minimize or reduce the amount of soft costs that go with designing these really high efficiency buildings. And that means, to the extent that we want to, not charge as much as designers, that's great. But if developers are used to paying the same amount and we can achieve cost parity with a conventional design, we can take that money and reinvest it in social causes. We can charge the same that we would
Yeah.
ordinarily charge,
Yeah.
and with the time savings and whatever that profit margin is, use it to do more social housing, or use it to green Detroit, or whatever it is.
Yeah. The other great potential I see there is an increase, or moving from early adopters to the wider market, because one of the barriers there is that if you want to model to prove or to show someone the benefits of going down the passive house route in terms of the numbers,
Mm-hmm.
it's going to take a consultant a couple of hours to plug in that project and say, hey, look, do you know that if you did it this way, this is what the outcome would be? To get to that point might be, a half a day or more, a couple of days, a couple of people, depending on the size of the project, to actually go through PHPP. Whereas if you had this type of thing, we just plug that in and say, hey, look, did you know that if you did these two things differently, this is what the outcome would be? It would just make it a big eye opener, I think, to people who weren't even considering the passive house pathway, because you'd be able to show them those figures up front.
Yeah, agreed. And the thing that's really exciting to me is that this is not, this whole concept, it's not just to speed up our work or to make it more efficient. it's a fantastic learning tool. And one of the things that I'm really excited about, in the passive house world, we've been focusing on energy and comfort and indoor air quality. But really, it's like, okay, we want to, we've got absolute metrics for space conditioning, for our annual demands, for our peak loads, and for our primary energy or source energy. And we're in a place now where we're starting to understand that energy is not the end all be all. It's more about having grid responsive buildings that are helping us reduce GHG emissions. That's really the end goal is greenhouse gas emission reductions. So we don't know all those answers yet in the passive house community. We don't know exactly which measures. If we start looking at marginal carbon emissions as an indicator, or we start using hourly data for marginal emissions for our specific region instead of regional source energy factors, we don't quite know where that's going to drive our designs. We might have some ideas, but allowing a process like this where one of our multi-objectives would be GHG emission reduction, and we give the AI a bunch of data that allows it to calculate those impacts on an hourly basis, we're going to learn from it. We are going to learn much more quickly than we would otherwise if we were like, oh, let's try this and see what happens. And then a year from now, let's measure the utility bills and what the emissions are. But guess what? That building's already built. We don't get to like go back and change it and say, oh, well, we learned something from that one, so the next one's going to be different. So, we don't have much time. We've been saying that for years, but we really don't. We don't have much time. In the next 5 years, like we need to make a big difference. And so, I mean, I came from the Silicon Valley. That's where I was born. I had lots of boyfriends that were into computer coding. So I kind of grew up steeped in it, but I never got into it myself. But the reason why I'm so excited about it is, hey, whatever tools are going to get us to where we need to go, I'm all about it. And, this is what I'm finding. It's like we've got brilliant young people that want to make a difference. They want to practice climate activism. They're smart. They're used to working with computers. They're fast. We've got all of these older people that are steeped in building physics and building science, and we love our spreadsheets, but man, spreadsheets are slow. And we've got this climate emergency looming, and we've got such a small time to turn it around. So that's why I'm like really diving wholeheartedly into this.
Should those of us who are still a little bit bamboozled by computer code and all those fancy words that you said, but have spent time learning how to become passive house consultants, should we be concerned that the computers are going to take our jobs?
Oh God, no, definitely not. No, I think one of the things, it's always a concern when people start hearing about like, oh, artificial intelligence, the robots are going to come take our jobs. There still is so much of what we do that relies on human interaction, human screening, right? To the extent that we start creating tools that allow us to do our jobs better, there needs to be quality assurance, right? There always has to be a human that's deciding what's useful, what's not useful, what direction we need to go to make the tool even more useful, and essentially analyzing the results that are coming out of this. Because these algorithms and neural networks, like they're only going to learn what we want them to learn with our guidance. So that guidance is absolutely needed. And being a passive house consultant and knowing building physics, that's the guidance that's needed. Is like, we had there's still a gut check that needs to happen, and there's still an experiential check that needs to happen where you look at results and you're like, no, something's really off there. Like I said before, there are things that I expect we will
blindly following.
for sure. There are things I expect we'll learn where we might have some surprise, like, oh,
Yeah.
I didn't know I would get this kind of
Yeah.
carbon emission reduction by doing this measure. But, you
Yeah.
know, by and large, I don't see that at all, that computers are going to be taking our jobs. I see it as
Yeah. Yeah.
those of us that are in the passive house consulting world, we will, you know, to the extent that our architects and the design process are using tools like this in early design so that we can more quickly figure out what kind of building we want to use, then the expertise focus is really going to need to be on assemblies, details, training
Mm-hmm.
our trades, helping streamline the whole construction management process. There's a lot of expertise that's needed in that area. I spoke about that on Construction Tech Tuesday last week, how I feel like more of us from the passive house community need to start infiltrating into the large scale construction firms and teaching those guys, getting them up to speed. And then I think there are even other areas where we could start infiltrating into, like material science. For those of us who have that sort of technical inclination to, you know, start helping people figure out how to do more carbon sequestering materials, or, you know, building integrated energy generating type materials. So there are lots of different places we can be. And for as many different pathways that led us all to passive house consulting, I mean, I was a professional dancer before. How the heck did I get here? You know, like there are that many different ways that we can spin out.
Yeah. Yeah. I need to remind people and myself, you're not an engineer and you're not an architect, which I can
No.
I can empathize with, because I'm not. I often tell people I'm not an architect. I'm not. I did an engineering degree, but I don't consider myself as an engineer. I never got certified. I'm not a builder. I love the fact that you have become such a leader, so influential and so inspirational in the field, but haven't gone down that traditional path of going to a fancy university and becoming an engineer or an architect. Certainly, that's a great pathway. But I think your story is such a great one that shows people can be so influential in this space from all sorts of different directions. And I think a couple of things that you said is, one is the connecting with people is always going to be really, really important. But also having I guess, an affiliation for, I kind of joke that it's the numbers, but I think it's not just the numbers. To me, it seems more it's about the result. It's about knowing, working towards an answer, being creative to get to a solution. It doesn't have to be the solution, but it's a solution to a problem that we've posed. Do you have any words of advice for people who are sort of thinking about this space and maybe feel that they're not qualified enough to be doing the types of things that you're doing and talking about now?
Oh, yes. Absolutely.
And I have to say as well, particularly, I mean, I have a daughter. I'd love for her to get into sort of a technical field, but she's already feeling it now. She's only 14 and she already feels like it's kind of more the space for the boys. How do we overcome that and get more girls into these technical fields?
Oh, wow. That's a really good question too. So, I guess one of the first pieces of advice that I would have to offer to anyone who maybe feels intimidated by the technical nature of the passive house space or the high performance building world, is that none of what we're doing is insurmountable technically. Like, most of the heat flow physics that we're working with, it's simple algebra. So to the extent that, someone can go through freshman or sophomore year, whenever they take algebra, it doesn't really matter. Algebra and geometry, like those are the ones that we use by and large, unless you start getting into hygrothermal flux, where we're dealing with combined heat and moisture transport. That gets a little more nerdy, but so that's one piece of it. The physics are not, they don't need to be that complicated to really be able to make a big impact. The other thing is that anything where folks feel intimidated or they don't know, the way that our industry is these days, there's so much more collaboration and folks reaching out and helping each other. And one of the ways that I got to where I am right now is by asking. When I don't know the answer to something, I don't pretend that I know it. I just ask, oh, I don't know what that is. Can you explain that to me? And that is a fantastic way to learn. It really is. Because then you learn what you don't know, and you learn to be curious. And that curiosity, I mean, more than anything else, that curiosity for me has just driven me further and further into areas of technical expertise, because I'm like, well, this is fun. I want to learn more about this. What's this all about? So, so don't be intimidated. Ask what you don't know. Be curious. And then in terms of girls or women feeling like maybe this is not a good space for them, this might sound a little strange, but one of the ways that I really experience my work, I experience my work in my body, even though it's very technical work, and I use my brain a lot. When all of the pieces fall into place and we find that sweet spot, there's a feeling of flow that I receive. It's like this fulfillment, and it's like, okay, everything is lined up. The energy is flowing in a harmonious way. The air is flowing in a harmonious way. Everything is being respected. All of the natural elements are being respected. They all have their place. And to me, it's like a dance, or like composing music or something, right? And so there's this aspect of creativity and working with energy in a very real way. We have energy workers that work on people's bodies to help them get out the kinks and such. I see the work that we're doing in a very similar way. We're all energy workers, and we're trying to understand. That's my dog in the background. We're trying to understand how to live in harmony with the energy system of our planet. And so in that way, our profession is a healing profession. It's not really just technical. It's a healing profession. So, that might be one thing to help bring more women too, is it's not just technical. It's about bringing energies into balance, bringing the natural environment into balance with the human environment in that interface where we intersect, which is buildings. It's the aperture between the two.
I just wrote down building choreographer. I think you're a building choreographer.
Could be.
I normally ask people towards the end, where things are going, but I feel like you've painted a pretty vivid picture of probably the pretty near future of where things are heading, certainly from a technical perspective. Is that happening now? Like, is that future now with coming back to the AI? Are people doing that?
Well, my team is working on that right now. Yeah, actually. So I have the pleasure of having found through the Passive House Accelerator Global Passive House Happy Hour a brilliant young person. His name is Trevor Fednya, and he is working with me to build this workflow and to create this AI. He just asked me yesterday, can we name it the Lorax? It's like, yeah, of course we can name it the Lorax.
Awesome.
So it is. It's happening right now as we speak, day by day.
Yeah.
And I, as I talk more about this, other people in the design industry that are working on similar efforts are coming out. And reaching out and saying, "Hey, we're working on this too. Let's collaborate. Let's find out how we can work together, and let's beta test each other's tools, and help each other create even better workflows." Yeah,
that's very exciting stuff. we've talked a lot about collaboration in other interviews, and just how much that happens, certainly at the accelerator, but also just Passive House in general seems to be a very uniquely collaborative space of people sharing stories, sharing successes, but also sharing learnings and failures, which is fantastic. And I hope that really continues. Specifically for Passive House, where do you see things heading there? Where you're getting some pretty impressive numbers now, some uptake of general population sort of hearing about Passive House. Where do you see Passive House specifically, say, in the next 5 years?
Well, what I'm seeing happening right now is, in terms of authorities having jurisdiction that are adopting or pointing to Passive House as a viable direction for stretch codes, reach codes, et cetera,
Mm-hmm.
that's going to be happening more and more. And I don't think that that's just in North America. I'm hoping that that's everywhere, as we all are realizing the tools that we have at our disposal, and that we have this very real emergency that we need to respond to. Not that we haven't for a number of years, but
Yeah.
so I see that as a trend that will continue. That Passive House will start becoming code. I'm also working on the ASHRAE 227 draft standard, which is a Passive House, a climate-specific Passive House standard, where folks from PHI and FIAS are collaborating, essentially bringing best practices and lessons learned from both approaches to Passive House, and bringing in all kinds of experts from the energy and high performance building world to help us. And what's happening there is that we're developing a standard that will be a reference standard for any jurisdiction that wants to use it, that will allow things to open up in terms of what energy models we use, what buildings we can have be passive houses in terms of typologies. So where I'm at right now with BR+A consulting engineers, they've been doing labs and hospitals and other kinds of high energy utilization intensity projects at zero energy for less than 1% cost premiums. And what I'm seeing as I do initial analysis on some of these projects, where project teams who have done the less than 1% cost premium net zero energy soldiers home, they're coming back and they want to do one that's net zero energy and passive house. Well, guess where the passive house options are landing? They're even less expensive. So I'm seeing in the very near future for non-residential typologies with high EUI that we're going to see some passive house uptake there, because it's the most cost-effective way to get to carbon neutral, period. So I'm really excited about that.
I mean, that's like when people start buying electric cars because they're just cheaper than gas cars, rather than just because they're cool and sexy.
Yeah. So, to the extent that we have bright engineers that are figuring out, the best way to engineer these buildings, who don't have the passive house piece of the envelope yet. And then the passive house piece of the envelope comes in and brings the insulation, the lack of thermal bridging, the air tightness. Like that's the missing piece in terms of the most direct, cost-effective path to carbon neutral buildings. So that's what I'm seeing in the next 5 years. Yep.
Very exciting.
Yes, my dog is excited too.
Thank you very much, Prudence, for your time today, but also a big thank you for your work on the Passive House Accelerator and being part of the Global Happy Hour. I've hosted events and I pulled apart and kind of thought about what it is about the Global Happy Hour that makes it such a unmissable part of a lot of people's week. And I think certainly it's the presentations and the people that are presenting the technical content, but I think so much of it is that community, which is created by people like yourself and Sean and the others that are part of that. It's just a really great space to be online. But also thank you for your work in the industry as well. You've really been an inspiration. I think will continue to be a inspiration for everyone. So keep up the awesome work.
Well, you too. It takes all of us, absolutely, and every single person that I have contact with through the happy hour, through just networking with folks in general, I get inspired every single day. So yeah.
Nice. And that was Prudence Ferreira. And this is part of a intention that I have. I'd really like to get behind the scenes a little bit with some of the people that are involved with the accelerator, because there are so many people doing some really great work. And this was my first shout out and introduction to one of the great people that are involved. And boy, what a way to start. Prudence is doing some absolutely incredible work on top of all the great stuff. And she her presence at the happy hour and other parts of the accelerator, but far out, she kind of blew my mind with some of that artificial intelligence stuff.
Yeah, mine too. The evolutionary algorithms is really inspiring and exciting. And and I bang this drum a lot, so I won't bang it very much. But we talk about I'm really fascinated with the parallels between Passive House and the clean energy transition, right? And the clean energy transition is all about learning and tech, and and she is diving into machine learning, right, and artificial intelligence. And for me, I'm not like Prudence. Well. There aren't probably a lot of parallels between me and Prudence, but one of them is that I don't have the architectural training or the engineering training, right?
Yeah.
And so my entree to an understanding of machine learning has been through my role as a communicator and marketer. And so it has to do with search engines. And Google has employed over the years thousands and thousands and thousands of engineers to build human designed algorithms to try to figure out how to provide good search experience for people. Meanwhile, though, in more recent years, they've started to have a parallel path where they're doing machine learning. So instead of having a human sit down and say, well, if you bold a keyword and you do this trick with search engine optimization, then this page should rank well. Instead, what they're doing now is they're saying, hey, machines, these are the pages that are really valuable to people. So we want these to rank well. You figure it out. So that's the machine learning is saying this is the result that we're looking for. Let's harness the power of AI to get to that result. And so when we start thinking about the potential to do that in buildings and shave off, get to the optimized, really close to an optimized result in moments. That's really exciting, because then we're talking about being able to ride the similar kind of downward cost curves that clean energy enjoys, because it's all about clean energy technology. So it's building design becoming more and more technology, which just bodes well, I think, for the future.
Absolutely, and I love that idea of just letting a computer run a whole bunch of scenarios. We know what the fundamentals of the outputs are in terms of the parameters, the sort of key passive house parameters, but then we can also put in other things like cost and sort of links to other buildings in the area and other amenity values, those sorts of things into that equation as well. We know a bunch of the inputs as well in terms of materials, the products, and the stuff that we can, or even if it's an existing building, and it opens up a whole new world, as we discussed in that conversation about presenting that information quite quickly and cheaply to people who weren't necessarily thinking about passive house, and saying, hey, developer person, did you know that there's this option which provides these outcomes and this is how much it'll cost, without having to spend a week of consultancy fees coming up with that. It's just an amazing potential tool. So the technology is super exciting. Another thing that I think is really impressive about Prudence's approach, and I guess the Passive House approach as well, is bringing in other people and particularly younger people to say, if these people get it, they've played with computers, they know how this stuff works, not scared of it, and bringing them into the fold. And I think there's a really nice intersection there of old fogies who know building science and the physics of what's important, with new people who understand artificial intelligence, and joining those two together, it could be an amazing result.
Yeah, there's this cultural dynamic, right? The culture of Passive House will be impacted by this, by this new approach, and it's almost like we're gonna have to get beyond arguing about whose algorithm is better, right? Because it's not algorithms that we're creating. It's elevating the notion of data-driven, a data-driven approach to kind of a new height. It can be, okay, well, let's see what the solutions are. Let's see what the optimized solution is, and we're gonna go with that. So I think I think that there's a piece of that might feel a little scary, but there's also a kind of, I think that it's also I think can be liberating, and it's not just within Passive House. It's also, well, how do we think about the overall impact of buildings on carbon, and how does embodied carbon fit into it? That piece of moving beyond just focusing on energy and thinking about grid responsive buildings, and when thinking about the timing of the energies of these buildings, and how carbon intensive the grid is at that moment, and all those kinds of things. Once we start to incorporate all of that stuff, things get really complex and difficult for a mere mortal to get their head around, and let alone do 20 different parameter, a parametric analysis of 20 different scenarios. So all being, it's so exciting if we can get to a place where all of that can be pre-worked by AI, and then we come in as healers, as Prudence referred to. I loved your building choreographer title. That was awesome as well.
Yeah, building choreographer, and I think that's a nice way of looking at Passive House consultants as well, because I think good architects are often in that role. They become a bit of a choreographer because they're instructing a whole bunch of people who are really good at what they do to dance together and to create something amazing, not as a bunch of individuals, but as a coordinated team. And that's, I think, the opportunity for anyone. You don't have to be a trained architect or an engineer, but you have to be a good communicator, and you have to understand Passive House and understand some of the important bits of a project. But if you can bring that team together and help them understand where they contribute and how they impact the other parts of the team, then that's where we are always going to need more people, regardless of our computing power and the fantastic advances of AI. I think that was also reassuring to note that we're not going to be taken over by the robots, but there will always be a place for creativity and for guidance and inspiration and teamwork.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, and I shouldn't really emphasize then when we have this new solution, we can, to the degree that we can harness AI to solve certain problems, it gives us more time and energy and perhaps money to be looking at other questions as well. And again, that gets to the complementarity of the Passive House as a means to get to these targets, and these broader, maybe we spend more time thinking about biophilia, for example, like I,
Mm,
you know,
Back to the roof gardens.
right, exactly. Things that may feel, for somebody who's like a diehard energy person, may feel kind of tangential.
Yeah,
Suddenly we have, we might have the time and space to be engaging with that, some of the more holistic elements of quote unquote sustainable design.
Absolutely, and that's a whole other topic that I think would be really interesting to bring in a urban planner at some stage. And I know there are some people in our community who do some of this work, looking at not just individual buildings but urban design, and looking at cities and the way that they work or don't work for people. Some of our cities, we've designed them more for cars than we have for people.
Yeah.
I know that when I try and cycle to work as safely as possible. So you're right. It opens up a whole new realm. Really exciting stuff. So I'll just also, before we close off on this session, I just wanted to shout out to our audience, which we've reached a bit of a milestone of 1,000 downloads per week, which is equates to around about 1,000 per episode. It's really exciting to see that growth. I know from attendance at the Happy Hour and Tech Tuesday and other events of the Accelerator that there is a growing and really passionate audience out there. But it's really fantastic to know that content is being received. So hopefully it's useful and helping to inspire others as well. So thank you to our listeners.
Yeah, thank you for listening.
All right. So what have we got coming up this week?
Well, lots of stuff. So this is Retrofit Month at Passive House Accelerator. So Monday, February 15th, or that's Tuesday in Australia and New Zealand, we're having the Passive House Retrofit Summit. So this is going to be focused on North American retrofit incubators and so leading programs to accelerate the adoption of deep energy retrofits in North America. Really excited about that, and we'll share a link so you can register and attend. The Passive House Accelerator Construction Tech this week will be smart ass tools. So that's ass is air sealing specialist. And so Kevin, the co-hosts of the Construction Tech, Kevin Brennan, Sean St. Amour, and Mark Willey will be presenting about the tools of the trade for air sealing passive house buildings. And then our happy hour will feature Dennis Wedlick, who it was on the podcast a couple weeks ago, and just a fantastic interview. And he'll be coming in to present about his work and melding passive house with fighting energy poverty in New York.
Awesome.
Yeah. And then, of course, lots of other stuff, educational work and other events from other organizations. We'll share a link to our roundup of all that in show notes.
Great. All right. Well, once again, thanks to all our listeners. And if you do have a moment, really appreciate it if you could head on over to wherever you listen and certainly subscribe if you haven't already, but also leave a rating and review to help others even outside of our bubble to find the podcast and hear all the great stuff about Passive House. Thank you very much for listening in. Really appreciate your time. And we'll be back again next week on the Passive House podcast.
All of the work of Passive House Accelerator, including the Passive House podcast, would be impossible without the support of our sponsors. So we want to take a moment to give a hearty thank you to our sponsors. Our founding sponsors are 475 High Performance Building Supply, Bax to Ingwe Architects, Glavel Foam Glass Gravel, Minotaur, Mitsubishi Electric Train HVAC US, Partel, RDH Building Science, Stocorp, and Zola Windows. Our stakeholder partner is NYSERDA, the New York State Energy Research and Development Authority. Thank you.